The latest bout of rolling blackouts have enraged South Africans and impacted negatively on the country's prospects for economic recovery. However, Minerals and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe in April gazetted a proposal to improve the threshold of embedded generation from 1 megawatt to about 10 megawatts. So embedded generation refers to the small-scale production of power connected within the electricity network. So by easing licensing requirements for embedded generation, additional capacity for the grid could come online virtually immediately. The added benefits could include less reliance on the national grid and reducing the risk of load shedding while also securing energy-intensive businesses. Get your sense of how this can work. Maloba Tshehla is the deputy spokesperson for the South African Photovoltaic Association. He joins us now via our video link. Maloba, great to chat to you. Thanks very much indeed for making time for us. I want to start perhaps with the broader issues that accompany the raging debate around electricity supply in our country. To many people, it almost seems as though the antidote to corruption in public institutions is by allowing private institutions to take over and supply energy. But we also know that the private sector is not immune to malfeasance. Do you think that aspect of the conversation is receiving enough attention?
Yeah, and I think you started me off on a very high note. I think there's a lot of credence to the ability of private sector in this specific instance around bringing on renewable energy cleaner, faster, and more reliably onto the grid. I think that's a huge area of opportunity and one that we definitely need to press more on. I think I just want to start with, just reiterating what you guys have said now around that every bout of load shedding, should be a stark reminder of the need to fast track what is actually an inevitable shift towards distributed clean energy sources. And we in South Africa have the track record of bringing these online quicker, at cheaper and cheaper prices and with more equitability across the program. And so these mornings and these stage 4s and 3s are a stark reminder of the opportunity that we need to actually unleash. And embedded generation is one critical part of that.
Yeah, it's a process called liberalizing energy supply in the country, allowing more players to be able to play their part in some respects. Let's talk a bit more about embedded generation. How would you describe that for ordinary South African who's not in the industry or the sector?
Yeah. I think your description was perfect. I was wondering why am I even being interviewed here? I think you summed it up perfectly. But embedded generation really is what you're saying, liberalization. So it is generation that happens very close to the point of use. So effectively, any end user who can finance these programs and get access to them, this technology, can generate their own electricity primarily for own use. And then if in the instances that there's excess, it can export onto the grid, either supplying back to the municipality or to Eskom, depending on who is their supplier. And what embedded generation really does in the context of South Africa, where over the past 10 years we've seen, some estimates at over 500% increase in electricity, is that people can lock in their future price of electricity, or at least a portion of it. And if you think of businesses, this is part of their OPEX. And so they have a better view on what their operational costs are related to electricity, which is good for their sustainability, good for their bottom line. But it also is an investment that they'll be making into this infrastructure, which has its own job creation effects. I think a month or so ago, we released a study around jobs in the PV sector. So embedded generation is a new market segment that's opening with the liberalization of electricity, and South Africa has a very, very good base and a good resource to exploit that.
Speak to me about the infrastructural requirements if any household or company is seriously considering embedded generation.
Yeah, so as it stands, we're actually seeing a lot of it. There's been an increase, a huge increase in embedded generation installation. And I think some of the figures we saw last year is that South Africa was, I think, 6th in the world for either battery storage market or embedded generation market as a whole. So there's incredible potential. And at the stage that we're at, especially with this 10 megawatt limit, which of course we are crying and pushing for it to be increased to even 50 megawatts, is that all people need are developers to come install solar PV systems, install adequate inverters that connect them to the grid or control the flow of electricity between the grid supply and their own embedded generation supply. Other than that, at many instances, there isn't much need for, let's say, the municipality or for ESCOM to put on much more infrastructure. Of course, as we get to increased installation rates, we will, in any case, as will be the point at any point in the future, need the municipality to make sure that their infrastructure can balance this new system where there's load within the distribution network. But at this stage, there's hundreds of megawatts that's available, almost at the flick of a switch, proverbially speaking, that can come from embedded generation.
Yeah. What are the considerations to be made around the role a municipality will be playing if a business or a household wants to actually go down the route of embedded generation? I'm asking this question because, I mean, that might very easily be what the bottleneck becomes, isn't it? The red tape around this.
I think the red tape at this point really is around that threshold. Like you mentioned, there's been a gazette for increasing it to 10 megawatts, and the industry input, almost at a consensus, is that should go all the way up to 50 megawatts, because what that is going to allow is that, one, intensive energy users are going to be able to reduce the stress that we currently have from a load perspective on ESCOM. But what it's also going to do is it's going to open up a new business model where the municipality can actually balance its system from any excess electricity that embedded generators can provide. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than some of the power that we're getting from new stations at ESCOM. And so this is going to introduce a new business model for municipalities where they can trade with their own users, right? As opposed to where we don't allow it and we don't make it conducive and people completely move off from the grid, and then you lose that business altogether. So there's a new business model that's becoming available to municipalities. But even more interesting is the fact that there has now been an inclusion within the Electricity Regulation Act that allows municipalities to potentially procure from IPPs. And that's an increasing opportunity as well, because they now have a bit of competition and they can look at different tariffs, but also cleaner energy sources, right?
Absolutely. The cost, of course, is going to be top of mind because that determines who can and actually can't consider an alternative like this. What are those facts and figures looking like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a very important question when we talk about the just energy transition, right? We don't want a case where only the elite, can become clean and green and everything. So especially with enabling municipalities, we now have a point where let's say a 50 megawatt PV wind farm, PV facility somewhere can supply very, very cheap electricity. In the last bid window 4, we were looking, well below the 1 rand per kilowatt hour. In this bid window 5 that we're currently involved in, we're going to see much lower prices. And so those can become available to municipalities. And what that means is that effectively municipal customers can start enjoying, if we can use that term, cleaner, much cheaper electricity. And so we can see a curb in the increase in electricity prices, even for the domestic, for the household. Further to that, those households that can, through financing, so there's multiple mechanisms, whether it is through a bank or through using your home loan facility, or through some developers who will build the infrastructure and share in those savings with you, and as a way of financing the infrastructure, households individually can go and get their own system. So there's quite a lot of variety in terms of how households can access this, but at the municipal level, that's where I think a lot of the equity can lie if we allow municipalities to procure these energy sources from IPPs.
I hear all of that, but how much, Maloba? That's the real question. Let's talk rands and dollars. I'm seeing in some instances that, some larger companies could be paying as much as 25 million rand. I imagine this is dependent, of course, on the capacity that they're looking to actually have produced through embedded generation. But again, it's important to attach a price tag to this because that paints the picture of who really can take place in this transition.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Look, I mean, it's not a simple answer in that you can start with a system as small as one that can carry your lights all the way to one with a battery that can carry you through stage 3, from 8 o'clock. So For some systems, you're looking at anything from 50,000 Rand, depending on the size of it and what you're connecting to it, all the way to, 100,000 Rand system with batteries. And so it will depend on the size of the household. It will depend on how much of your load you are wanting to be independent of the grid on. So I think the best thing is for people to look at sites like the Sapphire website, where we do have a network of installers that can provide quotations for it, accredited installers, which is quite important for us, as well as the price trajectories for these technologies. And then each household can kind of look at it and see what makes sense for them. I think the danger of putting a price, if you say, no, you can get a system for 10,000, and then you're getting one that can just light 2 of your lights, and then it doesn't make sense. And if we say it's a 500,000 Rand system, then everyone else in the rest of the country, including you and I, can't afford it. So it's quite important for everyone to make that analysis. But it is a modular system, so you can start small and over time keep increasing it, which is another benefit of it.
Absolutely. Well, interesting to note how the trajectory of something like this will pan out. I guess only time will tell. Thanks very much indeed for your time and your insights as we try to understand the alternatives to relying on the grid given the context we're in. Maloba Tshehla is the Deputy Spokesperson for the South African Photovoltaic Association, otherwise known, of course, as Sapphire. Thanks very much indeed once again.